Now, U.S. President Donald Trump has issued a fresh threat to Iran. Accept a deal quickly, or U.S. will destroy its key oil export hub of Kharg Island, as well as its power and water plants.
Well, the threat comes even as reports are now emerging that President Trump is open to end the ongoing war against Iran, even if the Strait of Hormuz remains largely closed. Now, the Wall Street Journal has reported this, citing administration officials. According to the report, Trump has told his aides that he is willing to end the military campaign against Iran, even if the vital shipping lane remains largely closed. The report says that Trump may launch a complex operation to reopen it later.
Meanwhile, an Iranian parliamentary committee voted to impose tolls on vessels through the Strait of Hormuz, the passageway through which 1/5 of global oil passes. State television said Iran would forbid vessels related to U.S. and Israel.
Trump has claimed that the diplomatic progress in ending the month-long war, but he also warned that if a deal were not struck quickly, U.S. forces would destroy, and I quote, all of their electric generating plants, oil wells and Kharg Island, and possibly all desalination plants as well, which we have purposely not yet touched, quote unquote, Donald Trump.
Well, Trump has been claiming that the United States is speaking to a more reasonable regime in Tehran and has sent a 15-point proposal to end the war.
Iran says U.S. president is lying about these negotiations while readying a ground invasion. It says there has been no negotiation with the U.S. in these 31 days of war. Tehran says that it has received a negotiation request, adding that most American demands are unrealistic and excessive.
The materials that have been conveyed to us under various titles such as the 15-point plan mainly include very excessive, unrealistic and unreasonable demands. The meeting that Pakistan held with its neighboring countries is a framework that they established themselves. We did not participate in this framework.
Iranian Parliament Speaker Ghalibaf, the man named by Trump as the one he's talking to, has hit back at the U.S. president. He claims that the U.S. is promoting its desirous news while threatening Iran at the same time. He warned it would be a big mistake.
Meanwhile, White House has repeated that the war against Iran should be over within another 2 weeks. Asked whether Trump's threat to devastate Iranian civilian infrastructure would not risk committing war crimes, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said that the U.S. armed forces would always act within the law.
Or else the United States Armed Forces has capabilities beyond their wildest imagination, and the president is not afraid to use them. That's not what I said, Garrett. And you're saying the word potential for a reason, because I'm sure some experts are telling you that in your ear to try to ask me that question. Of course, this administration and the United States Armed Forces will always act within the confines of the law. But with respect to achieving the full objectives of Operation Epic Fury, President Trump is going to move forward unabated, and he expects the Iranian regime to make a deal with the administration.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Trump's partner in attacking Iran, said more than half of his military aims had been achieved, but he also refused to put a timeline on the operation that has ignited a regional war and sent global oil prices soaring. And right now, for more on this, we're being joined live by John Erith. He is a senior policy director for the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation in Washington. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. Let me begin by Trump's statement. He first said that he's going to destroy Kharg Island if no deal is done. And now we have reports coming in where he says he's willing to end the war without reopening Hormuz. What do we believe in, and what would it mean if at all he goes for ending the war without opening the Strait of Hormuz?
I think that this is all things we have heard before. President Trump is making threats in hopes of reaching some sort of conclusion to the conflict. What we've seen these threats before, and the president has failed to carry through on them. So I don't think that there is much possibility that he would act on the threats at this time unless some very difficult to assess what the actual situation is, because the White House has never made clear what its goals and objectives for the conflict are. And until you understand what the goals are, it's impossible to measure success or lack thereof.
John, if you just look at the recent reports, what they're suggesting that And out of everything that has come out from the White House, Washington exiting from the Strait of Hormuz at the earliest seems most plausible, given that they've already been on a timeline and we are on week 5. The China visit for Trump has already been delayed once. He's postponed it to 14th, 15th May. That gave a certain sense of he would want to solve this or get US out of it at least before that. But when we come to the reports that are suggesting that he may exit the Strait of Hormuz, leaving it locked, leaving it closed. So if you look at the larger aspect, if that happens, that strait was open. It was a free-flowing region before this war started. It was started unilaterally by the US. Those objectives have remained unclear since the beginning. And now the US exits, leaving it closed, giving Iran ideas of charging a toll. Where does this leave everybody?
It leaves everyone in worse shape than the world was before the conflict started. That's very clear. The strait has been closed as a result of the conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran. If the conflict were over, if the bombing on both sides stopped, then presumably the strait would reopen and the oil trade would be able to flow through again. Now we're hearing that Iran may decide to keep the strait closed even if the conflict stops. It's a little bit difficult to understand what the motivation for doing that would be, because the Strait of Hormuz is an international waterway and there are treaties and international agreements and standards to provide the right of innocent passage. So it would be difficult to assess why Iran would take such a step at this time.
And just on that, do you think it's legal for them to take a step at this point? And would the ships and all the other countries would be willing to pay that kind of amount to get their ships out of there?
It's difficult to say. I'm not a legal expert, so I would not understand. I don't see what Iran's justification is. If they are charging illegal fees for the passage of ships through an international waterway, that amounts to piracy, which is certainly illegal. But I've not seen what their justification would be for doing this.